all of you know, you're all highly aware that this thing that we call digitalization is enveloping our lives at a pace that most of us don't really understand. The pace of change around it, the role of machines, machine learning, and the kind of fast computing and algorithms and AI is operating at a level that we simply are not alive to or in touch with at the pace it's going in the private sector and under the underbelly of certain parts of societies across the world. The question that we are trying to raise here is that something which has been created which has such a force for good, how do we protect that? How do we make sure that digitalization can be something which has been there to democratize, to create a different mindset, create that kind of hyper connectivity for good, being able to seed growth that's inclusive and seed growth that's sustainable. And so how do we get to a point where we think about creating resilient infrastructure in Europe? How do we make sure that digitalization, that is going to, whether we like it or not, immediately as it is now, but in the next 5 years, we cannot imagine what's going to happen to us in terms of our consumption, how we lead our lives, how we speak to each other, and the dialogues that are happening. At the moment, there's a child being born everywhere in the world that the first thing it interacts with is not a book, but it's a phone. And you've seen it. So we're creating generations below us and around us who are being inculcated through the phone and through tablets, and we haven't got a clue what's that's doing to their brains, their sense of social mores, and their sense of being social, and a sense of humanity. Everything is happening in a different way. Their brains are going to be potentially wired in a different way, but it's something we need to think about. But those are the that's the big picture of how we try and think about digitalization as a force for good rather than a force for bad. And unfortunately, what we're trying to do here, also in Europe and elsewhere, is that what kind of regulation is fit for purpose? What kind of approach is the one that we need to have in place? But up to this point, the Commission, on at least the past 5 to 10 years, have been taking this kind of elective approach, asking people to elect to kind of move towards good practice rather than actually be regulated. We now have the Digital Service Tax Act, we have the DSM, we have the AI legislation information, which is quite an interesting piece of regulation that's coming about. But in the context of where we find ourselves right now, I'm going to first we've got a number of contributors to kind of make us think about this agenda slightly differently. And the first contributor I have is Simonetta from the European Space Agency. Where are you? There you go. I mean, we've worked very closely with yourselves at the European Space Agency. And, you know, over the past 3 years in our work, what we've realized is that people haven't really they still don't understand the potential and the capacity of space infrastructure, but space per se, to create a more resilient Europe. And when you say that to people, especially policymakers, they think, really? But could you share with us, because you're close to it, Simonetta, and it would be great for you to say, you know, Copernicus is what the most famous thing that, you know, in terms of Europe's aware of, you've done the space capabilities, but there's so much more. But you have a data model that actually NASA uses the data more than anybody else in the world, free of charge. And that's what Europe has given the world. How do we recapture that opportunity that space offers to be more resilient in the future?
Thank you, Demendra. Good morning to everybody. Yes, sure. In a reflection about the social contract and the new renewed social contract of Europe, I think the reflection on how to best use available technologies, including...
Can you bring the mic closer to you?
Including the digital ones and the space technologies available is certainly a very important element and a strategic one for Europe. Today you have two objectives. I mean, two main objectives at the level of the European Union. One is certainly the green agenda. Second is the digital agenda. And both of those objectives can be supported very widely through space technologies and what we do at the level of the European Space Agency. And that's why we have such a close collaboration with the European entities, Parliament, Commission in particular, many more. But what's the wealth of it? And you talk about the positive aspect of using the digital evolution, not the negative ones. And this is what we are trying to do and what we do since over 30 years with the work of the European Space Agency. Not only we build satellites, and we have today 15 satellites in operation for looking at the environment and the state of the climate, but we also are building more than 40 currently. So in Europe, we have the biggest wealth of available data and infrastructures associated to space to support the climate challenges and the environmental ones. And on top of that, I would like to say the sustainability challenges related to the better management of natural resources, I think of water there, and all of what is related to food security and sustainability in general. Now, the challenge today, but it's also an opportunity, I'd like to say, is the one to best use the available technologies in the digital context. And that's what we do, for example, with the Galileo satellites, the satellite navigations, where you do localization. And since February this year, we have an operational service available for everybody who needs to do localization, but also in support of domains like the agriculture one. And this is a really success story of what's been developed in terms of common effort in Europe between the Commission, ESA, but also the industry and the users. We need also, I think, today to make citizens more aware of the potential of those technologies, not just space seen as a faraway domain, but space seen as something that really impacts everybody's life. Because what you need to do and to have today, we're working on climate, on variables, on those indicators related to climate change, and we do support those indicators with data from space. But not only we need to see what's the state of our planet, we need to see about where we stand on deforestation, sea level rise, but we need to have methods of having a forecasting, a modeling, and also eventually know what the Earth will evolve into to support decision makers to do that, but also to support citizens to live better. Today we have about 500,000 people every year dying due to air quality in Europe. And that's statistics from the European Environment Agency. So how to use best the digital technologies? We are now working with DigiConnect, and this, I think, should be part of certainly priorities for Europe overall to integrate what we can do with artificial intelligence, what we can do with machine learning in terms of supporting the better exploitation of the data available. Because you just don't need satellite data looking at the Earth. You need to have products that citizens can use, information that people can use to take decisions, but also to live better. And that's really, I would say, a collective challenge that we have. At the European Space Agency, we work on the technology side, on the industrial side, with contracts, with industry, with developing the better systems that respond to user requirements. But this is really a collective European effort that has to be fed into this reflection today of the overall evolution of Europe and how to best use the exploitation and the potential of space.
Simonetta, thank you very much for that. What, is your message being heard? And I know that's a political question, and you, as a civil servant, you might find it difficult to answer. But, you know, in this kind of quiet, closed space, share with us. Are policymakers getting it? Because, you know, we worked together for the past 3 years. I mean, and it's been kind of a journey of, you know, really opening up policymakers' eyes and minds to the fact that this is kind of the biggest game in town, and it should be. And it can be life-saving, but it can also create intelligence for better policy making. Are they getting it, do you feel?
I think
in the next mandate, what have you heard so far in terms of what's going to happen with, let's say, space?
Certainly, there is a positive trend in the sense that I've been in the space business 30 years. We've been working with policymakers at the level of the European Parliament, at the level of national governments, at the level of civil servants nationally. And more, there is an increasing understanding of the potential of space and the technologies and the data and the value of that associated to that. Just to make you an example, we just last week made an agreement with DG Clima. DG Clima needs, for the Green Deal and the 255 implementation policies, tools to monitor with also space the implementation of those policies. And this is a recent evolution and I think a very strong perspective in terms of a collaboration on the realization of what is the green agenda. Another thing I like to say is also in the context of civil security, and if you look at today with the geopolitical context of Ukraine, you had a lot of estimates about yield production already available in terms of the work we were doing with Ukraine with satellites. And of course, those became much more relevant also to decision makers after the war was started. Or another domain, this summer we saw the heat wave in Europe, we saw the fires, we saw the flooding, we saw the heat wave in the cities. Everybody realized just watching at the TV of the potential of space. So I think there is a positive increase in trend, still a lot to do, especially a lot that what they invest is about, you know, an equivalent, really such an investment, but with strong and very strong potential benefit. And I think the work with decision makers has to continue as well.
Sure. Okay. I mean, because your point about citizens is so important, because actually, given the reliance on the mobile as almost like a social right, people almost think that if you don't have your mobile, it's going to just like destroy your day. If they didn't realize that actually it's powered through a satellite infrastructure, and that people just don't realize that. I suppose this is for all of us to think about, not for you to answer, that the only concern that we have in the conversation we're having around space is that at what point will it be too late not to have, let's say, the Bezos and Musk effect in Europe in terms of absolutely drenching the space, you know, the space above Europe with private satellites, and what that does to the reliance on private actors for public good. But that's something for all of us to think about, not necessarily you. Ben, I'm going to come to you. Vodafone, household name, and again, one of people that we've worked with over time. Ben, if we, our supposition is, and I think it's a right one, that digital infrastructure is essential societal infrastructure, right? It's essential for everything in the way we live our lives. What, as a provider, you're everywhere, mostly. You're still in the marketplace. I mean, there's competition, etc. But putting that aside, this is not about the stake in the market you have as Vodafone. It's more a case of, one of the recommendations in our thing is that we're asking private sector people to be more social actors, part of this shareholder model of creating a better society. If infrastructure, digital infrastructure is societal infrastructure, is essential, what do you need from government? What is government doing right and needs to do more of that, or what's it not doing that it needs to improve on?
Thank you, Demendra, and I think good afternoon, everyone, just about. Well, let me start by answering your question, by not directly answering your question, but picking up on something you said a little bit earlier. You talked about the digitalization being both a force for good and maybe a force for bad. And we've worked with Friends of Europe for a number of years, and I think one of the most powerful things that we had in our collaboration was going back, I think it's 3 years ago now, yes, where we did these citizen groups, just talking about digitalization, not as a large corporate thinking we know what everyone wants, but actually going out to the people that matter and saying, what is it about digitalization that really matters for you? And the one thing that really came through strongly and clearly was that not everyone was convinced that digitalization was a force for good. As much as they were excited about some of the opportunities, they were worried about some of the threats. And I think this is, when we ask to work with policymakers, we have to bear this in mind. And right now, at this point in time, we're seeing society polarized. We're seeing the threats of digitalization playing out in our lives day after day. And the days of the Wild West must be over. We have to accept that we have to have a sensible and grown-up approach to digitalization, where there are rules, there are responsibilities that every actor in this space has to comply with. But I don't want to dwell on the negative. I want to move then forward onto the positive, because what do we want from governments? I'd say the first thing to really get this force for good. And also, by the way, hopefully it's a source of happiness. Hopefully some of you have seen our little robot dog walking around today, powered by a private 5G network. Right, digitalization can bring a smile to people's faces, and we have to remember that it will be a force for good if we embrace it in the right way. But what we want from governments is to really think transformational, to think big, because in the end, digital connectivity is going to transform everything we do. We're just on the cusp of this. You talked about the smartphone, and if you leave your smartphone at home, you realize much faster than you realize you've left your wallet or purse at home if you left your keys. It might take you half an hour to realize you've left your keys at home. It's about 30 seconds until you realize you've left your smartphone at home. It's transforming everything we do, but it's not about smartphone. Everything is going to be transformed, and every societal and economic problem we have is likely to have a digital connectivity solution to it. So how do we make sure that our biggest European companies remain competitive? Digital connectivity is going to be at the heart of that. How do we make sure that our smallest European companies can grow, can be the big challengers? Digital connectivity will be at the heart of that. How do we make sure that our grids, our energy grids, are renewable, are sustainable? Digital connectivity, smart grids will be a critical part of that. How do we make sure that agriculture, we make the most of scarce resources? There's going to be digital connectivity through sensors that are going to be driving that. And how do we rejuvenate our rural communities? Connectivity is going to be a fundamental part of that. So the first thing for governments is to think really big and understand that we're not just talking about the next generation of apps, or then are we going to go from 100 megabits per second to 200 megabits per second to 500 meg? No, it's transforming our sectors, it's transforming our public services. It's going to be the difference between who has a healthy life and who has an unhealthy life. And that's something we all need to embrace. So then if we want to think big in terms of transformation, what do governments need to do in terms of thinking big? I'll start with this city. Thinking big means really unleashing the power of the single market. We are, in the digital space, a fragmented 27-member state market, fragmented by also not just the geography, but also the narrow way markets are looked at. Is this the market for mobile connectivity? Is this the mobile for fixed broadband connectivity? Is this the market for social media? Is this the market for satellite connectivity? All these things are merging into one. It's one giant ecosystem across a huge economic bloc, which is Europe. And if we can get the most out of that economic bloc, then the digital ecosystem will start to unleash its magic. And that's something which we find really important, because we've, as Vodafone, traditionally been seen as a player within a certain constrained part of this digital world. There's no constraints anymore. Everything is interacting, everything is interoperable, everything is interrelated. And we need governments to work with that, because we have an ecosystem where we are forced to both cooperate and compete with other parts of the ecosystem. And that cooperation and competition has to be held in a very delicate balance. If that balance gets out of harmony, we find the ecosystem starts to eat itself, to use a sort of analogy. And if the ecosystem starts to eat itself, we get to weaknesses in the ecosystem, and those weaknesses will in the end undermine the entire ecosystem. And for us, that's where we're concerned about the state of connectivity across the EU. We don't believe it's at the level it needs to be. It's not bad. We don't want to criticize too much, but we look to other parts of the world, and they are forging ahead. For those of you that like statistics, if you look at OpenSignal, they do a global 5G benchmark. The 10 top countries in the world for 5G availability, not a single one is European. This should not be the case, but it's the way the sector is being regulated, over-regulated, is driving these bad outcomes, which in the end are going to harm consumers and businesses in the long run. So what do we need from governments to remedy this? The first is it's got to be a participative approach to policy making. So like we did the citizens groups on a small scale, this needs to be done on a more macro scale, but including companies as well, to really determine where we want to get to. Because again, looking at this city, we've seen some very bold and ambitious targets, which we fully subscribe to, the digital decade targets. This is a great example of how you have a vision of where we want to get to. But it's not just about where we want to get to, it's how do we actually get there? And that's where we see a inconsistency between the vision and the implementation. And that's what we need from governments to be very clear on, not only where we want to get to, because it's easy to say 5G to every location in Europe and every single house should be connected with either a high-capacity fiber or cable connection, but how do we get there? How do we solve the economic conundrum that the industry faces? And I won't bore the people in this room with a detailed shopping list of policy changes that we would like to have. For those who want to have a long shopping list, come and see me afterwards. But I'd say two words, which I think are critical for us as a sector to drive forward and meet the expectations of our citizens, meet the expectations of our businesses. And that is predictability and certainty. We as an industry have had a very substantive communications code in Europe, which sets a lot of the rules and the regulations that we have to comply with and our expectations of us. And that would be fine. It was an attempt to bring together disparate pieces of regulation into a coherent whole, and by and large it was successful. But then over and above that, there's every couple of months there's another initiative. Oh, what about this? What if we changed this? What if we just added a little bit of additional obligation? What if we change the rules about which vendors you can use? What if we change the rules about how you charge for roaming? What if we just change the rules on inter-EU calls? Every single initiative in itself can make sense and can be sensible. But if you don't do it within a framework which is cohesive, coherent, and which gives us as investors spending billions of euros every single year in digital infrastructure, the predictability and the certainty, then at some point the investors say to us, actually, we're not sure that what we're investing in today is going to deliver what we expect it to deliver in the future. And that's where we start to get into the situation we're in today, which is a 5G performance, which is not bad, but it's not where Europe needs to get to. So my request for policymakers and governments is really come together, make sure we have a very clear identity of where we want to get to, and it needs to be bold because the transformation of our economies and societies is worth fighting for. But on the other hand, make sure we're realistic about how we're going to get there and how we can create this investment-friendly environment where everything is cohesive, coherent, and predictable and certain as best it can be in a world where there's crises crop up all the time, so that we can go forward with confidence and meet the expectations of our citizens and our businesses.
Ben, thank you very much. Those descriptors are not really associated with Europe, as you know from our experience of policy making. So you're asking for a leap of faith to a certain extent. Are you, as a provider, are you saying? I mean, I understand the point that stop kind of over-regulating or creating new bits of stuff to adhere to. Have a vision for the kind of connectivity we should have in Europe. The pathway to that, is that more competition, or is it a greater structured competition? I.e., do you work with 5 companies, or do you just open the playing field and say, as many of you play in this field, and we could look at a future where we have Amazon Incorporated providing everything for us across Europe?
So for me, competition is critical. I think we've had enough years and enough experience of looking at what happens in markets where there isn't competition to know they don't deliver very good outcomes in general. Competition should be the first, second, and third priority on setting policy, and then governments need to intervene and step in when competition isn't working. But it's not to say that competition is there's always increasing returns to competition. There are not always increasing returns to competition because there's a balance between competing on price and competing on investment. So in our industry, where we have technology change, it used to be every 12 years, maybe now it's every 8 years, or probably every 4 years. If you get the competition for price to a level where you don't release the competition for investment, you end up in the slow lane, and you can't invest in the new cycle of technology, which in the end delivers the better outcomes and the better value for consumers. And to put it into I'll make up some numbers here. Don't hold me to account on these numbers. But do we want Europe in 10 years' time to be the average smartphone or the average SIM subscription to be €8 for 4G or €8.50 for 5G or 6G? And that's sort of when you get 4G, you might get a 2 gigabit allowance, and when you do 5G, you might get 50. So it's understanding what you pay for. We've been increasing the capacity that customers get every single day, but you have to have the competition investment to get you there. And so that's where you need, again, I talk about balance within the cooperation and competition, is balance within the competition of the short term versus the long term, which is what is important. But we will never say that competition is a bad thing. We were created on the back of opening up markets to competition, and we strongly believe in it.
No, sure, thank you. And I ask you that because I think that the time at which you were created is very different to now. And you have a very different kind of playing field, especially in the digitalization marketplace. And so I suppose our caution is we need to be really careful about what we're doing, that an unfettered market approach may lead to some very negative consequences if we don't think about it. I'm not asking you to answer that question. I'm just saying something for all of us to think about. But there's the other end, which is, I suppose, the point at which this becomes digital democracy. That our democracies, our access to public services, what we do about our identity, everything is on here, and will increasingly be here. So I think the challenge for the EU and governments nationally and across the space is that how do you make sure you walk into that in a way that creates security, safety, reliability, and trust? And that's the issue, is that increasingly this will become the basis on which we do everything. And we mostly do everything already, but in terms of public service, it's quite likely there's a kind of very short time before everything that we experience through a local municipality that's bricks and mortar will be purely virtual. But let's think about what that might mean. So on that note, Sabine, I want to bring you in. You've been in Romania. You're the chair of the technology platform there, but also you're the president of the International Telecommunications entity. Share with us your thoughts on what that which is good that is happening that might be able to be transferred across Europe.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, I'm chair of IT and Security from the Chamber of Deputies, and I wasn't the president of ITU. I wish to. but I was just the president of the biggest conference that they are having each 4 years. It's the Plenipotentiary Conference.
Still, that's big cheese.
Yeah, it is. It is. I will try to build a bit on what Tom says before about the cooperation between the public sector and the policymakers when creating legislation. And I would like to say that there are countries in Europe where this is happening. At least at the level of the committee I'm chairing, the Romanian Parliament, we have a body which is called Law and Technology Lab. And we have their academia, we have the businesses, and we have the civil society. And nothing happens without them. We are not doing those consultations that, I'm sorry to say, but many countries are doing, or even Brussels is doing, by asking the others to join them after 80% of the job is done, and when nobody wants to change the philosophy behind the policy that they are proposing. We are asking them to join us from the beginning and to say which are the objectives, how can we use technology for good, as you mentioned, how we can use technology to be more resilient. We precisely say that for this session we'll have, I don't know, the law for interoperability or the new law for digital signature, because we are having one in Romania, or the law for the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure and so on. So this is how we should act in the future if we want to really achieve the goals of European Union, because I think that what Europe is doing and what's happening in Brussels is great. I think we are trying to export democracy through technology. We are having our core values at the foundation of technology, and this is not happening all across the world. But if this is going, and I'm going to give you an example, a story from Moldova, our sister country, on how they proceed with the legislation. But so if we are going to implement those legislation in a manner that is going to kill the innovation, we are going to be all the time behind other regions of the world. Now about the examples. I mean, Romania, it's fully understanding that we have an opportunity now, that the world is changing really fast, and countries like Romania can leapfrog others with technology. We have one of the fastest internet in the world. We are among the first. It's the cheapest one as well. It is the cheapest one in Europe, and Vodafone knows that it's a strong competition in Romania in terms of the price for the users. We have the biggest cloud infrastructure project on recovery and resilience funds. This year we deployed an identity application. Maybe it's a bit too late, but we have it, which is a single sign-on solution for all the platforms, public platforms in Romania. So we are moving pretty fast. In terms of legislation, I mentioned already, we are among the first countries who did a legislation for critical infrastructure, especially for 5G infrastructures. We have a new legislation which is going to be adopted soon for digital signature, because the things changed a lot in the last 10 years, and we need to adapt this to make this more available for companies especially. But I said that I'm going to mention about how was our approach on a very important law of interoperability, which is mainly how the data are exchanged between the IT systems in Romania. So you can really kill the bureaucracy. It was impossible in our country to ask for the public institution to share their data. It wasn't like in Estonia or in Finland, which were more successful than us and other countries, because everybody wants to stay on the data like it's theirs. It's the data, it's owned in the end by the people. Those organizations are only managing the data. So we weren't successful, and we implemented the law within that Law and Technology Lab. And after having this law adopted in the parliament, we started to develop the solution, the interoperability platform, which is actually helping us to implement that well-known principle, once-only principle. In Moldova, they were faster. And why? Because they built first the platform. They started with the technology, they didn't deploy it, and after it was, they started to test it, they asked for our support from the Romanian government and Romanian parliament to ask them how to build their legislation to be in accordance with what's happening in Romania and in Europe in general. And guess what? They are faster than us, and they achieve better results. So sometimes I think we just need to let somehow the engineers to do their job and to work together. and only when the product is ready to get on the market to see how it can or need to be regulated in order to be used for the good of the humanity.
Great, thank you. I mean, so that last point is very much about the role of public finance should be perhaps to be patient, capital, take risk, absorb risk more, but create the opportunity for the thing you just described, the platform to be built first and tested before moving forward. But there are many examples of which for public money. And it's quite, I mean, forgive me, people would never assume that Romania would be in the position that it is in because of this present, it received a sense of its progress, especially on tackling issues like corruption, etc., and so forth. And it's great, and we're not going to fact check what you're saying at all. But it's great that so much of that you suggested is happening, and perhaps it's because where you are historically and the kind of energy and enthusiasm there is for modernization of matters in Romania.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, if you're looking on the numbers, in the last 20 years, Romania is the fastest growing economy in Europe. I mean, we have a IT&C sector which is producing more than or almost 8% of our GDP, with only 220,000 people there. And this is our chance to get through a digital transformation in the future that will help us in even avoiding those problems like corruption that we have in the past. Not that much today, but this is the chance, as I said, to leapfrog the others through innovation. And our role as policymakers is to make the legislation that will allow them to innovate more and to bring many of the European or companies across the ocean in Romania to innovate more. Romania is not anymore, you raised the ball, it's not anymore a best cost country. It's a best value country, especially when we are talking about technology.
And is there a vision in Romania to create, a more of a kind of digital democracy? So you've seen in certain countries across the world, in municipalities, they've become wholly digital. Everything about services, voting, health, data, getting prescriptions, etc. Is there a move towards that?
Yeah, there's it's a move towards that, and I think it's like in any country, when the leadership, like in any organization, when the leader of the organization assumes a digital transformation process, it's happening. If the leader of the organization is not assuming that process, is not happening. Now we have the leadership of the country, people that assumes this process, and it's happening. Maybe the biggest problem we are having is the one with digital skills, with the digital education. And this is something that Europe in general didn't invest it enough. I mean, you can have the technology, but you cannot make everything as user-friendly as the social networks. That's impossible in the end. Maybe the AI and the chatbots will make the technology more accessible because you only have to prompt or ask for something, and it's going to be easier not to navigate through a dashboard and so on. But this is an issue in our country. I mean, only 30%, to be honest, of the population have basic digital skills, which is less than what is happening in the rest of Europe. And it's true, we are behind in terms of digital public services, but a lot has been done in the last 3 years, and probably the results are going to be seen in the next 2 years.
Thank you.
Thank you also.
Colleagues, who would like to react? Any views, any thoughts on this agenda? I was going to bring you in, actually. You've read my mind. No, I know, it's really crazy. So one of our European young leaders, I'll bring you in, absolutely. Nicholas, I mean, please introduce yourself, because I know you've got a view on this topic. But can I ask you to think ahead? So we can diagnose a problem, okay? But what would you like to see happen? You're based in France, you're where you are, and we know that Macron has a particular view about digitalization. It's not been the top priority on his to-do list, but in terms of what you'd like to see happen on the digitalization agenda in the next mandate and beyond, what would that be?
Well, I would like.
And you can say what you wanted to say anyway, but
my name
answer
is
that question.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Bryan. I'm the chairman of the European Startup Network, which is basically the big bad lobbying organization for startups here in Brussels. That's not my job. I'm a startup founder also. What I would like to see in the next mandate? Well, I would like to see our money where our mouth is. If you look at all the money that is flowing into technology and startups, half of it on the European continent is your money. It's taxpayers' money through the European Investment Fund, through the Banque Publique d'Investissement, through KfW in Germany. It's your money. It's our money. And I'm really, really fascinated by the gap that is happening right now between the citizens that don't really see this money. There is a huge gap in terms of skills, in terms of access to technology and access to the products that the startups are creating. And what we have been discussing here in this room, we're talking about throwing 100 million euros at generative AI, a startup that was created only 3 weeks ago. We are talking about throwing a lot of money into 5G and so on and so forth. But maybe can we put our money where our mouth is? We want to solve the climate crisis. Okay, how many startups are going to help solve the climate crisis? How many startups are being created to solve the waste crisis? We heard about Waste Tide. How many startups are being created to solve the water crisis? I don't see that much happening. And this is a collective decision to make, because this is happening on the board of the European Investment Fund. This is happening on the board of the EIB. This is happening on all these big European institutions. This is taxpayers' money, and I believe this should be used to solve real problems.
So there you go. But while you've got it, Nicholas, while you've got the mic, one of the things that we've been recommending for quite some time at Friends of Europe is that we need a kind of Europe-wide sandbox for innovation. Exactly the kind of thing that you're describing, that actually some of this money could be pulled from the various banks or even from Horizon funding to enable entrepreneurs to start applying themselves to these big challenges of whether it's water, climate change, et cetera, so forth. Is that what you were looking for? In that we could, but done in a way that's curated not by the banks, but in partnership with people like you, civil society organizations? I know it's kind of a very different thing, but what's your reaction to that as an idea?
Sandboxes. So 30 years ago, I would have said yes, because I was 4 years old and I love to play with sandbox. But now I'm a grown up, and I may tell you, Dharmendra, we don't have time. I mean, if we want to solve the climate crisis, if we want to solve the water crisis, if we want to solve the waste crisis, we don't have time for sandboxes. We need to put at scale global solutions. And really, startups have something to play here, because there are not that many institutions in the history of mankind that have been able to deploy solutions at a global scale in less than a decade. So let's use this famous hyper-growth, hyper-scale, blitz scaling to solve real problems. That would be fantastic.
But the presumption being that the ideas are already out there, that the solutions are already out there. Because isn't that the issue? That some people say that, do we have enough in the system to be able to scale? Because you're right, actually, we don't have time, absolutely. But COVID, we created a vaccine in a manner and in a time frame hitherto unheard of. So adversity strikes, we're able to do things fantastically well, but at a fraction of the time. So are the solutions out there from your perspective?
Yeah, the money is out there, the solutions are out there. It's just that it's not connected.
Sure. I'm just asking, the reason why I'm pressing you is, and others do contribute, is that so what do you say to the next mandate? What should they do? Because saying that the EIB does this and there, they're not going to do it just like that. What's the idea that we should be promoting, that actually putting things to scale requires a different approach? What would that approach be? And I'll bring you in and others. Do you have a view?
Yeah, I mean, we can keep this conversation on and on, but if I may just throw one thing, let's basically kill the unicorns and start building what I would call gigacorns. So instead of having startups that are valued at $1 billion, can we just pay more attention to the startups that can remove a gigaton of carbon outside of the atmosphere? If that would be the new metrics for at the EIF, for instance, or EIB, that would help a lot. That would be fantastic.
That's why I was pushing you. Exactly it. It's changing the approach fundamentally on the issue, as opposed to describing some of the issue problems. I'm going to come to you because I know you wanted to, and yourself, and then yourself, and you. So, firstly, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ljubo Georgiev. I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria. I deal with urban planning, urban policy making. There is an issue that was not mentioned in the discussion until now. It relates very much to the to the digital data that's being created by satellites, which we have used a lot. It comes as kind of an idea of a common good in a way. Even you described it, NASA is the biggest user, like for free of it. Oh, it isn't. Okay. Anyway, this other issue of great creation of data is this. So our digital footprint, the personal one, not so much of companies or startups, but of citizens. We all know that currently the digital footprint is being monetized mainly by US corporations, nothing against the US, but it's just how it is. There is this idea of creating data spaces in Europe. It's being supported by the Commission, I believe. But there are also some very interesting examples that happened in Barcelona. I don't know how much you are aware of them, where people actually become owners of their digital footprint and manage it. You can decide to kind of sell it and authorize others to use it. But this is very important for me, as I've seen people interact with digital technology, citizen participation, when you actually know that you are capable of dealing with this data, managing it. And I think this is a way that should be explored further. Well, regulations maybe, but also examples rather before regulations, in order to give good methods and structures and platforms for people to be able to decide what happens with their digital footprint, even monetize on it themselves before corporations do. So that's my point.
What do you want from the next mandate in that respect?
To dig in the question at first place, to take the Barcelona example and see what went good there and what went bad and kind of scale it up, as was said. This would give instruments for implementation of this logic.
Great, thank you. Yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Just as a reminder, I spoke
Do
earlier.
introduce yourself
Yes.
again, please, because a different audience potentially.
Agnieszka Łukaszczyk, Vice President of Government Affairs at Planet. It's a space company, satellite company doing Earth observation, and I wanted to talk about this startup situation. So I think the problem is, because you asked what has to happen in the next mandate, and I don't think companies need subsidies, so they need seed money, they need contracts. This is how company grows. And so I don't think there's a problem with seed funding in Europe. You have all these different schemes, to give money to startups. But the difference is, for instance, there's been studies done between startups here in Europe and in the US that the number of startups is around the same. The difference is that many more startups actually scale up in the US, where in Europe they either don't survive or they stay in a very small level because the money is not there. Why? Because the government is much more willing to take risks in the US, and venture capital is much more willing to take risks. This is where the money is, where this is not happening in Europe. My company that I've mentioned, Planet, was started by European, American, and Australian. They decided to establish in California because that's where the money was. Simple as that. It would never grow to where it is in Europe at the time. We now have 400 people
And
in
is
Europe.
that because the venturing capital was higher risk, with a higher risk appetite?
Absolutely, because we're doing something that innovative that has never been done before. We miniaturize satellites from these, satellites of the size of a bus to 6 kilograms. I mean, it's a huge,
Indeed.
difference. And we are the only entity in the world that is able to observe every place on Earth every day. Nobody else is doing that. Not NASA, nobody else. But it was a risk. It's either going to work or it's not going to work. But space business is expensive. Somebody has to put money in it, right? And the money was there. So I think you need to give contracts to these companies in order for them to grow. This is why you have these Elon Musks and Bezos in the US, not here, because that's where the money is. I'm not saying you want these personalities here necessarily. Launching a car into space is not probably something we want to repeat, but that sort of mindset where the money is. And then why you were mentioning earlier, talking about Elon and Bezos, do we want to rely on these private companies, right? It can be a little bit scary. And I think you have to find a balance. Private sector will always innovate faster, quicker, and cheaper. The government simply cannot do that because they have taxpayers' money. They have to be much more cautious in how they. So if you want to innovate quickly, this is this is where the money is. So I think you need to find a balance where there's a good cooperation, because you will never have a solution from one data source. You need many different data sources to have a product that is actually a solution. So from private sector, from public sector, and you need to find a balance. So I would say for the public sector, do not repeat what the commercial sector is already doing. Do something that hasn't been done yet.
Or
Fill
do
in
it
that
with
hole.
them
Or
differently.
do
I
it-
suppose the issue of the renewed social contract is that we're in a different world, right?
Yes.
Risks are higher. You could have, let's say, a Musk or Elon decide, Elon Musk or Bezos has a bad day, and says, you know what, sod
Which Elon
it.
does sometimes. by the way.
Exactly. Sod this. I'm going to make it X. I'm going to do this. Suddenly, billions of people are affected.
Of course.
You have a system which perhaps, let's say, the international banking system, which is based on small bits of software engineering and let's say, capacities. And that's owned by the private sector, not necessarily by, the
Yeah.
world PLC. Something goes wrong, there's nothing you can do unless you've crafted some sort of relationship of accountability. I suppose that's where
Yeah.
we're going as a think tank on the notion of a renewed social. It's
Absolutely.
not saying competition is bad. We're not saying we don't need big private sector, but do it differently, I suppose, with a different mindset.
Yeah, yeah. And then one last point on that, because we're also talking about these startups. The previous speaker was talking about how they should really do business that is contributing to the sustainability. There have been studies done that the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them, just 13 of them can be helped with by Earth observation alone. So the business that I'm in. So if you're going to be a business, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you might as well make money on something that actually is going to be impactful, help the world, because you can really develop something that is going to impact these things. So we have a big role to play, and let's keep that in mind when we innovate.
Thank you. I'm going to go to women in tech. Because I'm not saying that all women are good, but neuroscience shows us, we learn from neuroscience that actually having more women in a room leads to better decision making, whether that's on stabilizing peace, looking at how we make policies about tolerating risk or responding to crisis. More women in a room will lead to better results, potentially. That's what our research has shown us. What's your reaction to actually making, you're in women in tech, is there a way in which that should be, is there a solution or a pathway where we craft different approaches to some of the biggest problems we're having with women in tech?
Well, as I said earlier, it's also a matter of women standing and claiming our agency to claim the seats at the table. That sometimes is not easy to do, even among ourselves. And if you were listening to the young gentleman that described what the future would be and what we need, and if you don't want to put it in masculine, feminine, let's take the Asian idea of yin and yang. What you described was yin. We've been in a century of yang, the masculine. What you need is the compassion as well. What you need is the emotions that were so negatively seen when women brought them to the table. Policy needs humanity. And for business, and for all of us in the table, we have a huge database of human knowledge in humanities. Ethics, virtues, morals are studied. Philosophers are the ones also needed at the table. Ethics by design, integrity by design is also what we need in the social contract. And I'm very happy that I participate in this beautiful work, because I was more than an hour talking about this. But if you need new contracts, and myself being a lawyer, you need new negotiations, and you need the women that were not there. We are at the table very recently, meaning we ourselves are not even yet capable to understand the impact of all of this. So I urge all the women and all the men to understand that we need to be at the table. If it's not at the table, we will not have the future we need. The future is female in the sense of we need to care. Humanity's care for humanity. And there's no return on investment if we don't have a world to live in.
Thank you. Marissa, as always, powerful. Thank you for bringing that bit of passion and heart into this conversation. But you know, as I was listening to you, I was just thinking how some of the heads of cabinet will listen to you and say, "Oh my God, that's such flaky stuff." And how do you kind of get to a place where it's actually heard and not seen as being flaky?
Yeah.
But thank you very much.
Thanks, Dharmendra. My name is
Introduce
Johan
yourself.
Lepasser. I used to be one of the 40 out of under 40s. Now I'm over 40 and I'm heading the EU Agency for Cybersecurity. And actually, I would like to
Say your
expand
name
on
again. I don't think we called
the
it.
EU Agency for Cybersecurity is my field. And I would like to expand on this word. I think Chen used it and Sabine used it as well. And why it's important when we think about digital future. And I had this great pleasure to actually meet Tiago today. Is it fine?
Closer to you, closer to you.
You can hear me, okay. Who's a great entrepreneur from Portugal, digitalizing farming. And I asked him, well, what about the security of your products and services? And he said, quite frankly, we don't care about that. Because, they're a startup and that's not what their customers are after. It's not about cybersecurity. But my point is that when we look at the cost of cyber attack to any digital company, that has gone up 200% over the past 2 years. When we look at the threat actors like ransomware gangs who used to go after the big guys like, Colonial Pipeline, hospitals, etc., more and more they are going to SMEs. Elections as well, of course, but SMEs, why? Because they will pay. Because for them, a cyber attack that will essentially ransom their whole data is an issue of either I survive or I don't. And they will pay the 500,000 or a bit more. So what I see is missing is an emphasis on also creating a cyber-secure digital single markets and really helping. And I mean, guys like Tiago, they don't have to know cybersecurity. They should be able to rely on cybersecure products that they take off the shelf and they use, and they cannot be hacked. So this kind of creating an ecosystem, a cybersecure environment where our digital companies can flourish is very, very important for this vision to actually come true. Thanks.
No, before you hang up, what's your assessment of where Europe's right at now in terms of cybersecurity, and where do you think it needs to be in terms of the next mandate? Imagine you've got the new cabinet here, and they can wax lyrical, but actually, a single worm in the system could shut Europe down overnight in every city. We know that.
Probably won't, because we are very heterogeneous as well.
Yeah, true.
And that's the strength.
To a certain extent, yes, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, we put a lot of emphasis, and quite rightly, on making sure that our critical service providers, transport, electricity, banking, energy, etc., are cyber secure. So all the regulation that we built up at the European level have been focused on this. I think in the next phase, we need to look what we can do for the mid and small size players in terms of cybersecurity, really for the SMEs and startups. And for them, they need a secure ecosystem.
Okay.
And that's, I think, where the emphasis should be. And I'm sorry about it. I mean, I used to be the head of cabinet of the digital single market.
I know.
And, job not done in this sense. So I do agree that we have a lot of things to do, but the time now has
But I'm
come
interested
to
in what you
shift
say.
really.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you're saying about the shift towards the smaller. But we know that 70% of infrastructure in Europe is owned by the private sector. It's owned by the private sector, not the public sector. In terms of security, though, be more direct and honest about what needs to be happening. You're no longer the head of cabinet somewhere.
Well, the maturity has to go up, and that's, I think, one of the big things. When we compare the average European company, they invest twice less to cybersecurity than the US. So, I mean, you need to put your money and your people into making sure that your service is cybersecure. But again, this goes for the big guys, not for startups and not for SMEs. They need to have the managed cybersecurity service providers that are trustworthy. They need to have products and services that are trustworthy, so they will be able to use it. They don't need to have the cybersecurity capacity within their company in order to do that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come over to that side of the room. I promise. I will. No. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do. I promise. I promise. So, but I want to bring a hacker in because I want to. Perhaps there's a need for more hackers in the system. If you mind the pun. Over to you.
Thanks, Dermend.
Do
Yeah,
introduce
I'm
yourself.
Denis Troio, Jaromil, a hacker and entrepreneur, social entrepreneur. I like to respond exactly to what Joachim said before, that we have a patchwork of rules. It's really accurate, I think, to say that uncertainty, precarity, and we had many episodes of precarity in our last, let's say, 4 years, it's what kills also entrepreneurship and also investments. And that's very accurate, I think. In the digital world, because now we're talking about the digital context, we have also a lack of understanding of what it happens. It's high speed. So in the policy making, we don't have so many competence to actually tackle the rules before the impact of the result of digital innovation comes. So we have a patchwork. It's a learn by doing. And I'd be pretty unpopular here, but policymakers do not have really like the sense of what happens when they do the first rule. So we have a patchwork going on. So I think there is a problem there. It's like the competence within the policymaking ranks is not there really on the digital. And this is also a generational issue. So I'm very happy. I'm class 2013. I was a young leader, let's say 10 years ago. And I think it's very important what we do here because we bring young people to the table. And that's very important. We don't have only a gender gap. We have a generational gap within the policymaking ranks. I was born in Italy, a place that has like the ethical commission on AI right now, like the president is almost 90 years old. It's very difficult to work when you have a leadership that is not updating itself or not leaving the road to the young people. So I think the generational issue is extremely important to mention.
Okay, just to kind of save you from having attacks of being ageist, we know that lots of 90-year-olds are very, very sharp. You heard our president yesterday. But it's more about mindset, because you can be whatever age, but having your mindset of a different kind is important. But you're right, in terms of technological development, you need to be aware. You need to be aware. You've been very patient.
So my name is Christina Van Bergen. I am, yeah, that's fine. Okay. So I'm a professor and I'm traveling a lot through Asia to talk with business, with university about our human-centric approach in the era of digitalization, including about artificial intelligence. So what I would like for the next the next step, it's first of all, speaking about cybersecurity, for example, I would like to have strong institutions. We have ENISA and many other European agencies. Europeans are not aware about these institutions. We have, for example, a European Center in charge of cybersecurity in Romania and Bucharest. I'm not sure that someone here, except the Romanians, are aware about this center. I would like to see a strong implementation of the legislation, the new legislation at the European level. Nobody knows, only the specialists are aware about this legislation. So as a normal people, Europeans, we need to be aware and we need to build digital skills on cybersecurity. Also, we need speaking about sandbox, we don't need to be so metaphorical in our thoughts. European Parliament, European Commission is working very hard on identifying risk, and we need to keep the pace. We need to take the risk, but we need also to keep in mind our human-centric approach about digitalization. Okay. And also about Eurospace, I would have a word. We have so many, we have a few strategic EU digital partnerships with India, with Singapore, with Japan, and I would like to see something concrete. We have seen India, it is so successful in Eurospace. Do we have an agreement, a specific agreement with them? Okay, great. So as a normal European, I would like to see in the newspapers on the front of the newspaper, on the media, that Europe has succeeded in having a successful partnership with India, for example, in many critical materials, in aerospace, and many things. So we need to communicate Europe. I would like to see more Europe in our news.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Gentlemen, you've been very patient. Please, again, introduce yourself.
I was actually waiting to tell you to ask Anne Pettifor to speak because her hand is losing circulation from being held up for so long. So to save Anne's hand, please.
I'm happy to be facilitated in that way. I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there. You've been there for ages. You're absolutely right. And it's a real pleasure to have you here with us.
Sorry, I really, the conversation has moved on.
Do introduce yourself, Anne, for the benefit of others.
My name is Anne Pettifor. I'm Director of Policy Research in Macroeconomics, Prime Economics, as opposed to Subprime Economics. I wanted to just challenge the ideology that, you know, the private sector is fast, is innovative, and is cheap. And just to remind you that the internet was not devised by the private sector, that this did not result it is not the result of Steve Jobs' work. It is the result of the work of the public sector in the United States, in particular the Department of Defense, that had the courage to take the risks needed to innovate in this way. Now, the private sector is actually risk averse. The demand throughout the world now is for states to de-risk the activities of the private sector. This is not capitalism. This is a kind of Soviet-style economics, really. So I just want to get away from this delusion that the private sector is always brilliant and innovative and willing to take risks. It's not. There's not a single bank in the world that is allowed to fail, right? All of the big banks in the world are now protected by the central banks and by states. They're too big to fail. The big platform companies have become too big to fail, right? And the government, the taxpayer, the state is going to bail them out. Now, for me, that's not capitalism. That's a form of socialism, you know, but we pretend it's capitalism. And capitalists and the private sector pretend that they're the innovators. They really are not. And I just want to challenge that ideology.
I wish I'd seen you earlier. Thank you so much. And thank you. Because, no, I mean, you know, I've total intellectual crush on this woman, I have to say, over years. I think she's absolutely brilliant. I'm glad you made the time to come across, and because your thought leadership is supreme. So thank you very much for that, and I'm glad you're here. We've got a couple of people. I know I've got only a couple of minutes, so this gentleman first, then you, Pierre, and then I'll bring yourself, and then yourself. So it has to be 60 seconds, each of you, please. So, microphone here, please. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Goran Boldiski, Open Society Foundations. I'm glad that I don't need to be the socialist now to bring that argument, but actually I really, really would like to bend on that, because there is a lot of regulation which is not about digital that actually favors the big companies. You look at taxation, you look at the investment regulation, you look at bankruptcy regulation. There are a lot of fundamental things. If you want to succeed, you have to put them there, and they're not there. People talked about contracts. Small companies cannot get big contracts because the regulations of winning those are made like that. But my key point is about the human brain. We forgot that. We forgot in this techno conversation. The human brain and technology that can bring us is actually that this gadget can make me forget democracy by physiological means. This can control me, and looking at my reactions, if we go further, will disable for me to create my own opinion. In liberal democracy, the fundamental element is human beings being able to create their own opinion. We've been manipulated, but not at a physiological level. If I think of what's the future, the first thing is that the regulation should go a lot in the physiology and psychology and actually prevent these digital gadgets to turn us into not robots, but something close to that. Okay. Because that we see in the other parts of the world, And we actually have a chance, not only by regulation, but also by showing example of how we act in real life
Okay.
to change it. Thank you.
I don't know. It's okay. It's so I take what you're saying. And hopefully, I don't think Dragos is in this room. Dragos Trojotri, who's the MEP leading on the AI legislation, but he has been here. So it'd be great to have that interaction with you. Pierre.
Hi, Damendra. Thank you. My name is Pierre. I'm a venture capitalist, so I speak my own mind, but also teaching an executive program at Sciences Po Paris and HEC Paris on the strategic competition on technology between the EU, US, and Europe. EU, US, and China, and also on venture capital. And just want to share a couple of sentences or a couple of thoughts about my experience. So we had a very radical technology allowing to identify a person without getting any private data whatsoever. And it's based on what this gentleman is saying, it's based on physiology. We'll not go into details on that, but basically we can identify a person in a total anonymous way, which means that is the very root of democracy, because then all my data, I keep them and I'm not sharing them. I think where I'm really worried is that the whole system is flawed, particularly as a European. Let me tell you why. 2 reasons. First of all, because the world is going towards more and more digital and technology, which means data gathering. Well, Europe is unable to have its own system on data because we don't have our own cloud. We've missed completely the social wave of it. So hopefully we might get the industrial age of capturing data. But I think we're at risk because the only initiative we started with Gaia, basically we open it to external countries like China and the US. So it's a problem. And the second point is that the largest data gatherers is on the US, Amazon and the GAFAM, and in China, and Europe has nothing. So Europe has become a vassal, and we are more and more being vassalized, not only in terms of our sovereignty, but also in terms of the humans being dictated by technology. And that is a major, major risk, both on democracy, but also on the supremacy.
So Pierre, I mean, but that sense of Armageddon, is it too late? What could the EU do? What could they start doing more of in their next term to prevent what's ahead of us?
Let me be very pragmatic. I think we have 3 problems. The first one is that unfortunately, most of our decision makers do not understand technology.
Indeed.
It's a major problem, no, but it's a major problem. One of the very few with whom I had conversations is Thierry Breton. And first of all, I'm not French. So, but he understands, he's an engineer, he's coming from the telecom sector. The second thing is that, and I spoke to a number of people in the European Parliament, some commissioners, they understand the principles from a legal point of view, but not technology. They don't understand it. And they don't understand what the risks are. So first is making sure that we get the right people in with the right brains and know what to do. The second thing is concentrate budgets. We are scattered around with many initiatives. It's very confusing, it's disorganized, and we don't focus on funds. The third point is venture capital market. What we had to do was to go to the US, which is absolutely ridiculous. Why? Because there's no venture capital market structured in Europe. In the US, you have one single tax system, you have one single financial market, and it goes very fast. And that's where you attract talents. That's why the Silicon Valley has emerged.
Thank you. Well, in this report, you'll see one of the foundation blocks is to collaborate and make coherent the major funding streams across Europe to make them more focused on delivery and innovation. So that's one of the things that we're asking for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just a last comment. We are forced, for example, I use different search engines. Well, we are forced now to adopt AI in our search engines. Go on Bing, and you see you're forced to accept AI. Same thing on Google. This is not, first of all, it's not democracy. Second thing, nobody's controlling them. We are doing a lot of legislation in Europe, but who's doing the audit afterwards? Who's checking that the GAFAM are really doing what they tell us they're doing?
That's a potential, a more important role for the European Parliament, actually, to have a specific committee on that role.
But then nobody audits.
Indeed, indeed. Let's speak to a politician who does know IT. Very briefly. Focus if you can, your contribution on what should happen in the next mandate.
Okay, so what needs to be done?
Introduce yourself again, sorry.
Marek Havrda, Czech government, but speaking at personal capacity. What needs to be done in terms of the next mandate, what I would like to see? I really like the de-risking of the state. I think the state, and in our case, the union, needs to play a much bigger role in being able to invest into new solutions. And we had Chen telling us what are the dangers, what are the problematic scenarios, as we're describing some of the remedies or kind of directions for the remedies. So we need kind of courage of the state, in this case of the union, to concentrate the investment and invest into these areas on the scale. So de-risking at the scale, I would say. And I will add one more thing, and that's this talent. I would like to see that Europe is really easy to be reached by the talent globally. So it's not going to Silicon Valley or other parts of the US, but the talent comes here. And if someone wants to come who is great and going to help us, please make it just 2 weeks waiting time. So not months, not years for the companies to get people in, but just 2 weeks at the EU level, and just let the people who come then to work across the EU. Because many of the startups, many of the scale-ups in the US are not founded by the US board.
Absolutely. You'll know this yourself, I'm sure. If we think about labour laws and, let's say, migration routes and looking at migration as an economic asset rather than a drain and a contribution of values, India's producing 200,000 software engineers a year with nowhere to go. And you'd think, what kind of relationship in terms of a trade agreement could you achieve to make that very different? Gentlemen over there, last contribution, I'm afraid.
I'm Timo Harakka from the Finnish Parliament, and I'm a politician who does understand technology. And I think there are quite a few of us, so I strongly disagree. Technology is not any black magic. It's something that everyone can and should and must understand. I have a very practical point to continue Anne Pettiford's wonderful provocation here, that the issue with private companies sometimes is incentives. In my tenure as a minister, I was very impressed by Juhan Leppäsaari, who spoke earlier, when he said that there is an incentive problem for cybersecurity in big institutions and big companies because they always have an alternative expenditure. If you're running a hospital, so instead of having a serious cyber attack penetration, you would want to buy, let's say, cardiological equipment with the same money. So they devised a European financing instrument that would help companies to incentivize the investments to cybersecurity. And I was waiting for that, but nothing came out in time. So the Finnish government gave a grant to private companies to enhance their cybersecurity. And these were sizable checks. They were like in tune of 100,000 euros. And that was oversubscribed in a week. So there was a huge need for the weakest link to be repaired. And this is something very concrete I would wish the next mandate to take on to help private companies, big institutions to repair their cybersecurity. Thank you.
So in specific terms, how would you frame that as a recommendation for the next mandate? What would you ask them to do?
They would need to devise a grant scheme where you put, let's say, 30%, as the Finnish companies did, gladly on your own money to receive a grant for a specific cybersecurity enhancing method.
Great, thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm out of time. But building on that point, if you were to use that concept to create a, let's say, a much more coordinated fund of funds. There are multiple funds in Europe, you know, but they're all over the place. There's no coordination. It's mostly siloed. But imagine, think if you could reimagine a world in which they were to coordinate the hundreds and millions of funds they've had, in pounds, euros worth of funds, into a mega 1 billion fund of Europe. What they could do, if you were to put it out there, to transform healthcare, transform education systems, transform how people consume public services. It would be unimaginable if you could do that. But that requires a boldness and a temerity and a sense of reimagining the world to be.